To order the special meeting of the San Paulo, Tuesday, August 25th. Good evening. The San Paulo City Council this Tuesday, August 25th. 2020 Paulo Center. At this time, if you're able to stand, please stand, and feel free to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. Check, 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 check. Madam Clerk, can you do a roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Councilmember Chavez?
Here.
Councilmember Carnejo?
Here.
Councilmember, or Vice Mayor Crosswhite?
Here.
And Mayor Juarez?
Here.
And we have Councilmember Ordinance, who is absent at time of roll call. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe all of the headsets have been distributed this evening. Creo que todos los audífonos ya se ocuparon. So creo que los que tienen puede oír en español. And also, I'd recommend that if we're going to have a lot of slide presentations, so if anybody would like to move from this area closer, you'd be able to see the screen better. And just as a matter of protocol, I'd like to recommend and urge people, I know there some people may agree or disagree with what's going to be said tonight, but please let's hold off on the clapping and especially no booing, because what that does is it deters people from voicing their concern or opinions for fear of somebody booing them. Instead, what we'd like for you to do is if you're in agreement with something, you do a hand wave or a thumbs up, and if you disagree, you can do a thumbs down. Everybody will see you, and it'll probably be a little more noticeable and less disruptive to what's going on. Thank you, I appreciate that. We're going to move on to item 4, which is proposed amendments to the Santa Paula Municipal Code, Chapter 150. We have an agenda. We have a staff presentation, but I'd like to invite our City Attorney, Monica Castillo, followed by Dan Singer, our City Manager, and if needed, James Mason, our Economic Development Director, to just give you a little bit of a discussion of what's going to happen this evening and a disclaimer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Please let me know if this crackles. It seems to be working fine now. Before we dive into tonight's meeting, we need to take note that in our review of a very thorough proposal from one of the parks in the community and their HOA, we noted that there is mentions of an initiative to indicate that the ordinance was originally adopted by voters. And under elections code, this is California law, under elections code, ordinances that are voter adopted can only be amended by voters. But there's an exception to this, as long as amendments do not make substantive, significant changes to the ordinance. There's for the city council and for our commission, our mobile home commission, to implement some of the proposals that the residents have presented and that you'll hear more about later. So there's going to be two buckets that we're going to consider tonight that council still has an opportunity to provide their views on and give us some direction for policy choices. So there are a few that we can implement soon in the near future that do not have to wait for an election. And then we're also looking to an ordinance to establish anti-harassment protections, and this can be done under a separate authority that the city has. So I do not believe any further comments from our city manager are necessary, so we can go ahead and begin with Mr. Mason's.
I just want to make sure that I get this straight and comprehend that, because this is the first time that I'm hearing that we have to go to the voters regarding amending such policies with some exception. At what point did you find out that was the case?
So we saw signs of this as we were digging into the substantive amendments that our HOA representatives brought to us. So that is in the summertime.
To the mayor, because I had mentioned this at a previous council meeting regarding ensuring that the people are here had access to accessible translation. We only have how many devices are in the room that don't understand what's happening? Hay personas que no entienden lo que está, que no hay equipo para traducir. Levanten la mano, por favor. Okay. I'd like to make a recommendation, Mr. Mayor, that we try to get those folks maybe in a group so that we can kind of share. Someone might be able to translate closer to them so they understand what's happening.
Oyeron lo que dijo Councilmember Chávez. Si se pueden juntar juntos ustedes que no pueden oír en español la cita hoy para que ustedes pueden platicar juntos de lo que está pasando esta noche. Si se quieren mover juntos de cada uno. And also, just again, we're talking about this. When was this initially first vote? And I'm sure you're going to talk about it, but just so everybody knows, when was this voter approved ordinance?
So we have in front of you the agenda for this evening. We're going to start off with an overview of the existing ordinance. And thank you. The other sessions. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So really, this rent control ordinance is made to protect residents from excessive rent increases and recognize homes are costly and difficult to relocate. It also aims to prevent gouging and displacement, promote predictability, stable rents, and ensure for if there's improvements to the park, they need to be spread out over a longer time period. And if there are any services or amenities removed, there should also be an adjustment for that. And then vacancy provisions. Currently, our vacancy provision is if a new resident moves into the park, there's a $25 fee increase in rent. And park owners may request additional increases to maintain net operating income based on a comparable rate. So if there are improvements that they need to do, they can ask for a CPI relative to new tenants coming in, improvements needing to be done. And it also requires a detailed financial review. So this is not something, if they ask for an application and ask for a rent increase, it requires substantive background and backup information, gross income, operating expenses, and there are certain exclusions to those increases. And then fair rate of return on process. NOI is net operating income, and that's the adjustment that a park owner can take. And a review of this would there must be completeness done within 30 days by the city, a public hearing within 75 days, and a final decision within 90 days. And any challenges to the final decision have to be filed in a superior court. So that's the time process for a rent increase outside of the annual rent increase. And then oversight and compliance for rent process. The rent administrator has the responsibilities of reviewing the application for completeness. That is not for accuracy. That's just that they've supplied all the requirements within what are required for an application. They calculate the CPI adjustments and decides capital improvement applications, housing service reduction applications. And the required review timelines for the administrator are 20 to 30 days for completeness and 30 days for approval, denial, or modification of a rent application. And then the Rent Review Commission, their responsibility is 3 independent members appointed by City Council. They conduct hearings and rule on the appeals, the fair return, that's the net operating income applications, and court challenges must be filed in Superior Court again to any of their decisions. And registration and resident representation, annual park registration is due on February 15th. Registration fees, funds, and administration. The ordinance disclosure required for all residents. Resident representatives are elected annually by January 31st. One side note to that, it's really important. We talked about this last time, that U.S. Parks have a park representative, and consider having a park board also, so you have somebody that can represent you. And then enforcement. Tenants may seek remedies on enforcement if there's overcharge of rent, if there's damages or willful violations, or injunctive relief and attorney's fees. The city may pursue legal enforcement actions, and the tenant retaliation is prohibited. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the overall impact, it creates a comprehensive rent stabilization framework. That's the intent of this ordinance, to limit excessive rent increases and establish a formal adjustment procedure. It should balance tenant stability with fair owner returns. Just wanted to, committed to get this back to the folks that had attended. This is just a quick summary of the comments that came from the public workshop. And I think this will be helpful for any that maybe had public comments to submit. It may answer some of your questions, but I just wanted to especially give council a sense of what the concerns and what the questions of the community had. So the major themes that were identified were commission and resident participation. There were questions about the role and the composition of the Mobile Home Rent Commission, and interest in greater resident involvement in the rent review process. Fair rent return and decision-making authority. There's an interest in clearer standards for determining whether a rent increase is justified. Questions about who has authority to make the final determination on a rent increase. One thing I wanted to say in this, a common theme with ordinances and process is us working to try and make this more understandable for the public. A lot of things are written for administrators and for our side, and I think it's important that you have a better understanding. That's what we heard through these cards, that a lot of this is hard to understand and it's ambiguous. The other thing is on the rent increases, concerns about recurring annual rent increases, questions about how annual adjustments are calculated, interest in understanding application, rent limits, and protections. And all of these questions will be helpful in informing how we put together the ordinance so that it's more clear in these areas. Then the other element was utility costs and park improvements. There's concern about increased water and electrical costs and what qualifies as a park capital improvement. And then finally, questions whether improvements costs can result in additional rent increases. Resident rights and protections, requests for greater tenant protections, and questions about existing rights under the rent stabilization ordinance. Interest in protections related to rent increases, retaliation, and other disputes, and about available tenant assistance and resources. Right now we're building a web page, and there's a lot of this information that's on there right now, and there'll be a lot of references from the standpoint of tenant rights and resources, as well as information on these proceedings. Everything that we have as far as workshops and these slideshows will be on there in English and in Spanish. And then owner transparency and communication. A request for clearer and more timely communication from park owners. There's interest in greater transparency regarding park expenses, utilities, and improvements, and concerns about language accessibility and resident notices. So this really, communication is really the theme here, that there's Spanish language information available, and that park owners are keeping tenants aware of any changes to their operations. And then finally, we're at a point where, I don't know. We can have, at this time, if there are any park owners or stakeholders related to park ownership that would like to speak, we have an opportunity for that. Just announce your name and.
Would it be beneficial first to hear from the HOA, the Craig Drive presentation? Okay. Mr. Carl Lawson.
Thank you very much. My name is Carl Lawson. Honorable Mayor and council members, can you hear me? My name is Carl Lawson, and I'm here today with a group of homeowners from the second largest park in the city. And I have spoken before council before. A little bit of background on me very briefly.
Just a little bit louder, Carl.
I've spoken before, appeared before council before. A little bit of background. I have over 30 years of experience administering mobile home rent stabilization ordinances for the city of Oxnard. I retired from that position several years ago. I have testified as an expert witness in numerous proceedings and rent stabilization around the state, and have a pretty good handle on the cases that have come before the city of Santa Paula. Next slide, please. Before I begin, I want to express the appreciation to the city staff and who conducted the previous workshops, to the city manager for the leadership, and the city council for having this meeting to receive the comments on this very important issue that affects a significant percentage of the population of the city of Santa Paula. And of course, appreciation to all those who are here today and who came to the other workshops. This is a crucial matter, and it's often considered a very esoteric or complicated matter, but there are some key themes which we would like to illustrate. There's 7 mobile home parks in the city, probably close to 3,000 residents. And homeowners, those residents are homeowners. They are residents who lease land. They're not like tenants of apartments. And the homes, for the most part, are not trailers that can be towed in and out. They are manufactured housing units set on foundations. That forms the legal basis for mobile home rent stabilization in the state, which was referred to in Mr. Mason's report earlier. Next slide, please. I want to cover the following points. First, an overview and summary. Second, describe a little bit about the Santa Paula's current ordinance, although Mr. Mason pretty much covered it very well. Part C, why amendments are needed. What has changed since 1992? Part D, talking about that which seems to have the most interest among the community, which is the amount of space rents that can be charged. And finally, a list of the proposed amendments. Next slide, please. But first of all, it's important to remember that mobile home communities are an essential part of Santa Paula's housing stock. And the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance is a key factor in preserving the affordability of that housing. In the absence of a rent stabilization ordinance, there would be no cap on land rents that could be charged, and the result would be a tremendous economic impact on those homeowners who cannot easily or economically move their homes. So an effective ordinance helps preserve the affordability of that housing. The 1992 ordinance is outdated. It does not reflect the changes in the law or the changes in the economic environment in which parks operate. There's increasing ownership of mobile home parks by corporate investor syndicates who have perhaps a slightly different goal than the families who used to own the mobile home parks here. Next slide, please. Our proposal is very simple. Keep those parts of the existing ordinance which work well. Amend the ordinance to reflect new state laws, and that is not just new state laws, but also case law decisions and the economic realities that are faced today. And we understand that those amendments may not always be within the purview of City Council. Some may be within the purview of the Rent Commission, and some may require voter approval, as the city attorney indicated. The goals of the proposed amendments are essentially right there. Eliminate ambiguity in the current wording of the ordinance and create clarity for how rent increases are calculated. Balance the interest of the homeowners and the park owners so that the city is protected. Protect both parties' investments in their community. The park owners have invested, and the homeowners have invested in those communities also. Reduce the cost to the city of administering the ordinance. And finally, clarify and strengthen the role of the Rent Review Commission. Next slide, please. Let's talk about ambiguity. We learned this in a couple of hearings in the last several years. A lot of the words in the ordinance are not completely clear, and some terms are not defined at all. Ambiguity is the enemy of clarity and leads to legal challenges when a decision is made. The wording of an ordinance should be clear. Number two, the additional rent increase. And here I'm talking about what Mr. Mason referred to as a fair return increase. Parks have the right to apply for a rent increase if they believe that their return on investment is insufficient. And what the city council can do is set the terms and define. What an ordinance does is defines what criteria are used to determine what is a, quote, fair return. What is the base year for determining what the previous a park was previously earning, and what are the criteria that have to be used now to determine what expenses are eligible to be claimed when calculating the current net operating income. That's a lot of terminology right there, but that's what's in the ordinance, and that is how these ordinances work statewide. There have to be standards implemented in an ordinance or resolution, and there is applied in every given case. Next slide, please. Another reason to reduce ambiguity is to reduce the city's costs. The city should not have to hire an outside consultant to process an application. The truth of the matter is the current ordinance has some very brief timelines for the city to process an application. The last two applications that came before the Rent Commission each had more than 1,000 pages of financial information. And that is something that has to be looked at. It has to be examined in granular detail. And the city turned to hiring a consultant to go through that documentation. That is not a burden that should fall on a city staff person. Mr. Mason has a lot of other things to do than to review rent receipts for are opaque. They're hard to understand sometimes. We want to make sure the hearings are open and accessible for homeowners. And that includes a couple of things. Number one, requiring full production of all the evidence that a park is presenting to the city that supports its application for rent increase. All the receipts, all the claimed contracts, invoices, and everything. The current ordinance doesn't require that to be presented to the homeowners, believe it or not. We also completely concur with the idea of ensuring language access for notices and for hearing. And finally, protecting homeowners from discrimination and from any kind of harassment for having exercised their rights. Finally, we believe there should be an internal appeals process. Currently, once a decision is issued by the Rent Review Commission, the only way someone can challenge it is to sue the city in court. We believe there should be an internal appeals process whereby the decisions on findings of facts can be handled without people having to hire a lawyer, spend the tens of thousands of dollars it takes to even file in court, and then wait a year or two for a hearing. There can be an internal appeals process. Next slide. Very briefly, Part B, Santa Paula's mobile home ordinance. Next slide, please. The objective of the ordinance is to balance the interests of two sets of property owners. It's not an apartment owner and tenants who can pick up and move out. It is two sets of property owners, the owners of the land and the owners of the mobile homes who have purchased a manufactured housing unit, in most cases set on a foundation. Next slide, please. There's two ways that are set forth in the ordinance that these objectives can be attained. The first objective is to protect the homeowners from excessive rent increases. Second, and this is critical, the park owners must be guaranteed a just and reasonable reasonable return. Those two objectives may sound like they're in opposition to each other, but statewide ordinances have to try to find that medium. How do you balance the interests of those two groups? And that wording is in the very first section of the current ordinance, and we don't propose to change that at all. Next slide, please. It's important to understand that the current system is set forth in 3 legal documents. One is the ordinance itself, which is codified in Chapter 152 of the City Code. And then there are 2 resolutions which are adopted by the Rent Review Commission. Because under the current ordinance, certain powers and authorities are delegated to the Rent Review Commission. They're pretty old resolutions. One is from 1998 and one is from 1989. The first one sets out rules of procedure for how the Rent Review Commission conducts its hearings. The second one talks about how capital improvement pass-through costs are calculated. And again, that's something that Mr. Mason referred to. So those 3 documents are the legal foundation for Santa Paula's system. Next slide, please. It's important to understand that those 3 documents together constitute and comprise what's called a system of administrative law. It's not like a lot of city ordinances which just say you can't build a gas station in the middle of a residential unit, okay? It's the city taking a very active role in balancing those economic interests by setting up what is in essence a mini court system. The purpose of that is to have a quasi-judicial, which means similar to a court system, so that disputes between these 2 sets of property owners can be resolved in an administrative hearing under rules adopted by the city. Next slide, please. Systems of administrative law don't mean parks and homeowners have to do exactly what the city council says. It means that there has to be a system whereby disputes can be adjudicated. The parties have to have due process. Who are the parties? The park owner applying for a rent increase or a capital improvement pass-through. The homeowners, who are the ones who will ultimately be paying any rent increase or pass-through. In a sense, also the city is a party, and we want to protect the interests of the city. Second point, we believe that administrative law systems must allow the parties to effectively participate in decision-making. It can't be a rubber stamp. Third, those who make the decisions must be neutral. You can't have a park owner sitting on a commission that decides whether that park gets a rent increase or not, and you can't have a mobile homeowner, a resident, deciding whether they should get a rent increase. There are ordinances around the state where you have members like that on commissions, but they have to recuse themselves when a matter comes up. It should be neutrals who make these decisions. Decisions must be based on the specific regulations set forth in the ordinance, and they must be based on evidence presented in a hearing, not on whether or not I like the park owner or the park manager, or whether I think the park should have a swimming pool and it doesn't. It has to be based on the evidence in the record. Those are elements that have to be somehow incorporated into hearing processes. Next slide, please. When it comes down to it, there's only 2 things that a rent stabilization ordinance regulates. The first is the amount and frequency of space rent increases. The second is what procedures are in place to pay for capital improvements that are made in a park. A capital improvement is a major investment of to improve something, just like when, let's say you put a new roof on your house. That's a capital improvement. If a park were to put in a new swimming pool, that's a capital improvement. The city has the right under state law to set up procedures as to how the cost of those improvements are paid for. Those are really the only 2 things that the city can regulate. Next slide, please. This city council has received lots of comments over the years from people who come before city council with specific grievances or complaints about other things that happen in mobile home parks. Certain things are not within the purview of city to regulate. One is enforcement of park rules. A park may have a rule which says that you can't park your car in, a homeowner cannot park their car in the street for more than 5 minutes while unloading groceries, and someone leaves it there overnight and it gets towed away. They may feel very impacted by that, but the city does not enforce that. That's part of a private contract, just like you don't enforce alleged violations of leases for apartment residents. It's very important that the people live there, but it's not something the city enforces. Second, evictions. State of California has preempted that field of life. The city is preempted from setting up any court system to decide who gets evicted or not. There's a whole set of state laws and procedures that protect both landlords and tenants when it comes to how evictions are handled. Those are very, very important to those people, but it's not something the city can regulate under a mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. The city cannot regulate who owns or manages the park any more than you can determine who owns or manages a McDonald's franchise in your city. It's a private business. They have certain rights. If it wants to be purchased, if it's purchased by an entity, they own it. The city also doesn't have the right to decide whether a park must make an improvement or an amenity. Okay. Some parks have swimming pools, tennis courts, others don't. It would be nice, but the city can't dictate that they do that. It's a private business. Next slide, please. Why are amendments needed? There's been a couple changes since 1992. The first is that there have been some changes in state law. City government can enact mobile home rent stabilization ordinances only because the state of California has a state law which enables local governments to do that. A lot of states don't have that. California is one of them. There have been some changes to that law since 1992. There have also been case law, which means court decisions, which impact the extent to which parks and homeowners can act and the extent to which cities and counties can regulate. So the ordinance is outdated. Not surprising. It's been 34 years since it was written. And second, and this is relatively new, there's a new model for park ownership and management. Before in this city, most parks were operated as a small business, usually by a family or a small group of people. Increasingly, and not just here in Santa Paula, but throughout the state, mobile home parks are invested in and purchased by investor syndicates, which set up multiple corporations to administer and run parks. They're allowed to do that. It does change the character of what the objective of the business is. Some would say, and the homeowners in Santa Paula here have expressed the feeling that some of those investors simply want to maximize the amount of money they can get out of the park to pay back their investors. Not just through rent, but through other charges also. This results in decreased affordability. There is a history of whenever a corporate investor syndicate buys a park in the state, not whenever, but in many cases, where all of a sudden there's a much greater increase in the number of people who are evicted. That's important because typically when a new homeowner moves in, or when someone's evicted, that opens up a space which a park can put its own mobile home on and sell, or increase the space rents of someone coming in. So whenever homeowners are displaced, that can lead to changes in the land use. That's an important statewide trend, and that's what municipalities around the state are reacting to. Next slide, please. There's 4 basic reasons the current ordinance needs to be amended. Number 1, eliminate ambiguous language. Number 2, update it to address those changes in law. Number 3, level the playing field, make the hearings more accessible so that people who live here who are impacted by decisions can actually effectively participate, and to reduce the burden on city staff. Next slide. Little detail on each one. The current ordinance was written in a different era, different time. And the people who wrote this were very well intentioned, I have no doubt, but they could not have anticipated the current highly litigious nature of what happens these days. Your city attorney will tell you that ambiguous language is an invitation to bad news in many ways. Next slide, please. I'll give you an example of how ambiguous language is exploited, or was exploited in hearings right here in this city. Case number 1. Park files an application, turns over 1,000 pages of documents to the city. City hires a consultant to review it. The attorney for the homeowners association writes to the park and says, hey, there's a hearing coming up. We would like to review that information. The park owner attorney writes back and says, no way. The city ordinance doesn't say you have a right to the information. I gave it to the city. I don't have to give it to you. It's essentially what was said. What does that mean? That means the homeowners association attorney had to file a public records act with the city. The city staff, the city clerk, city attorney, city staff had to spend time going through that to determine what documents could be turned over. And eventually they were turned over. But on top of that, less than 24 hours before the hearing, several hundred more pages of documents were turned over. Okay, so this is what happens in here. How can people, how can the homeowners association effectively participate in a hearing when the language of the current ordinance doesn't require for production or discovery of documentation? Next slide. Changes in laws and financing. There used to be an exemption under state law which said that any space which was subject to a long-term lease of over 1 year was exempt from local rent control. Well, that's out of the law now. The state law has changed. The city ordinance still says that spaces that are exempt under that old provision of the code are exempt. So that obsolete language needs to be updated. Economics and financing, I've already told you about that. We can skip that. Next slide, please. Leveling the playing field. Homeowners associations should be seen as equals to park owners when there's a hearing before the commission. One example of wording that's in the current city council commission resolution states that all information presented in a hearing about the finances of a park have to be presented by a certified public accountant. That means even the homeowners have to hire a certified public accountant just to say, hey, these numbers don't add up, or you're missing something here. That imposes a cost on homeowners. I don't know how many of you have ever hired a CPA. They're well worth the money, but the money is not a small amount of money, okay? Especially for something like this. That current language represents a barrier to homeowners effectively participating in a hearing. Next slide, please. I think I just said that. That's the case I'm talking about. In the case last year, the homeowners had to pay nearly $4,000 to a CPA just to produce a short report about what documentation was missing from the park owner's application. They had to raise that money. There's nobody giving them that money. Next slide. Cost to the city. There are tactics that drive up city legal fees. Withholding information, doing document drops at the last minute, less than 24 hours before a hearing of 1,000 pages, like I referred to. The current system also, number 4, every time the Rent Review Commission meets, they have to conduct a Brown Act meeting. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, the rent hearing should be open, but a Brown Act meeting means that the city clerk has to give notice, okay? It has to be posted, and every decision that the commission makes is subject to a meeting like that. What happens when a commission gets a motion to continue a hearing? Just to change the date of a hearing, they have to have a hearing just to decide whether they're going to change the date of the hearing. This can really increase costs to the city. And finally, capital improvement pass-through processing. The current ordinance places a great burden on the rent administrator, Mr. Mason over there. If a park submits documentation that they wish to increase rents for a capital improvement, he's got 30 days to go through whatever they've got, decide whether it gets amortized, whether it's really a capital improvement, whether it qualifies, and there's no mechanism for homeowners to have any input on that. He has to issue a decision. We believe those things drive up the city cost a lot of staff time, and as with any dedicated municipal employee, Mr. Mason's going to be consulting with the city attorney on something that is of this importance. That means the city attorney also has to spend time on how much the rent should go up if a park puts a new roof on clubhouse. That's not a good use of their time, and there's a better way to do it. Next slide, please. Let's talk about space rents. Next slide, please. Park owners have a right to raise space rents. I know there are a lot of people here who not want to hear that, but park owners have a right to raise space rents in order to have income stream to maintain the park and to earn a return on their investment. And fair rent increases are necessary. to maintain the financial health of the business. And as I mentioned earlier, park owners have the right to apply for, to request a larger rent increase if they can demonstrate in a hearing that their rate of return has declined. And the ordinance has to have a system where they can do that. And almost all of the court cases around the state have to do with parks that have said, we want more money, and the city or the rent commission says, not so much. Next slide, please. Believe it or not, homeowners support fair rent increases. Homeowners understand that park owners face increased costs. For example, let's suppose that there's a resident manager in a park. As the state's minimum wage goes up or economic conditions go up, those costs will go up just like other costs we have. Not every cost at a mobile home park has increases every year, but there are cost increases. There has to be a mechanism to allow for that. And homeowners recognize that periodic rent increases are there. It is the amount of those rent increases that's at issue. Nobody objects to a 2% rent increase. 50% is a whole nother matter. Next slide, please. And I didn't say this in the last slide. Homeowners have invested tens of thousands of dollars each in their own space. They want to live in a nice community. They know that it costs money to maintain it. There are three types of rent increases under this ordinance and under virtually every other ordinance I've seen. The first one is a guaranteed annual rent increase. That's the one that Mr. Mason referred to that the park can apply for every February 1st. Second is the additional fair return increase, the one that I've referred to several times here. The third is the capital improvement pass-through rent increase. Next slide, please. The guaranteed rent increase is based on the inflation rate for Southern California. Each fall, city staff notifies each park, here's how much you can raise rents next year. The parks don't have to prove they need to raise rents. It's an automatic increase virtually. We have a few thoughts on that. The increase is the same for all parks. Next slide, please. The additional increase that parks can apply for a fair return or rate of return, that's the one that requires a hearing, and that's the one where the regulations and the wording that this council adopts are going to be key. It requires an evidentiary hearing. Evidence has to be produced. This is how much we used to earn, and this is how much we're earning now. The evidence is subject to examination. The other party has to be able to review that, ask questions about it, and see, do those numbers add up? Do those numbers add up? Are these expenses real? Are they reasonable? The ordinance has to have a clause which says that expenses must be reasonable. Next slide, please. Here's a list of our proposed amendments. Next slide, please. Number one, definitions. Add clear terms. We propose 9 terms that are not clearly defined in the ordinance that should be clearly defined. Resident representatives. We believe that the current ordinance has a gap in it, an omission. It doesn't state that a homeowners association can be their resident representative. We believe that it makes perfect sense that if homeowners have formed an association, they are a resident representative. Why is this important? Because that's the organization that has the right to appear in a hearing. Among others, it has the right to get notice of a hearing. Any homeowner can appear at a hearing. But someone that has homeowners that have taken the initiative to form an association, they should qualify as a resident representative organization. The current ordinance doesn't say that. Third, as we said before, we believe there should be a hearing examiner or a hearing officer to do a lot of the work in analyzing applications, review them, so that Mr. Mason doesn't have to do it, so that the city doesn't have to hire a consultant. That person should issue findings of fact after hearing from both parties. That person's findings of fact then go to the commission, who can focus on the law. These are all pretty much technical amendments, these first 4. The last one is to ensure that the current ordinance complies with the new state laws. Next slide. About rent increases. The current ordinance needs to be clarified to show that whatever the rent increase is added on to the rent that was in effect from the previous year. Okay. It doesn't say that right now, believe it or not. There also has to be something in there which talks about what happens when a park charges more than the city has authorized. I'll speak about that in a moment. Second, under the applications for those fair return increases, the increases greater than the annual increase, we believe there should be specific, much more specific regulations in there governing how those applications are processed by right now than there is right now. There has to be an opportunity for the homeowners to have access to that financial information which a park relies on to justify the increase, and not just the day before the hearing. You have to be able to analyze it. They shouldn't have to hire a CPA to present evidence. The current ordinance does refer to the maintenance of net operating income approach as the approach which should be used. That's a technical term which says we compare what a park made in a base year, in this case 1984, which is a long time ago, and for which there often are not great records, and what they're making now. But what is needed is specific language saying, what expenses can you count? Can you count the salaries of corporation executives that live somewhere else as an expense for this park? That's a question that has to be addressed. We also believe that applications should be submitted in advance of the date for which the park requests a rent increase. The last two applications requested retroactivity going back 2 years. Had an increase been granted in either of those cases, homeowners would have been facing a massive bill. Next slide. About hearings, I've already said, referred to this, reiterating. Language, hearings should be, and notices should be provided in Spanish in a city like Santa Paula. Hearing procedures, they have to be notified in advance, open to the public. All financial records have to be revealed. We believe the hearing officer should have the authority to compel the production of records, to require justification and proof of expenses to be presented. And the hearing officer has to issue written findings of fact within 30 days of all the evidence coming in. Next slide, please. We believe that the appeals process should call for any decision can go to the Rent Review Commission for a final decision. That means you don't have to hire a lawyer and go to court to get your day in court. It's in the local court. And we believe that the commission itself should be designated as the body with the authority to review, to accept, to reject, or modify the hearing officer's decisions. And whatever the commission does becomes the final city action in that case. That allows your city legal counsel to provide advice to the commission as to what may or may not be in accordance with the law. It empowers the commission to focus on the law rather than looking at and adding up receipts. And of course, all commission hearings have to be conducted in accordance with the Brown Act. Next slide, please. Homeowners should be able to participate in hearings, remove that CPA evidence requirement. And finally, the anti-harassment, which Mr. Mason referred to and which Ms. Castillo referred to as possibly being in a separate ordinance, because that should cover more than just people who live in mobile home parks. People who exercise their rights, whether they rent an apartment, a house, condo, or a mobile home space, should be protected from harassment. And that's certainly within the city council's purview to adopt as a standalone ordinance. Next slide, please. A couple of things have happened in the last few months. First one is right there. Parks increasing rent more than allowed. I indicated that the city sends out a notice to parks saying how much the percentage rent increase is for all parks. Well, one park is charging 0.5% more than what the city notified. Okay, 0.5% may not seem like much, but when you multiply it by the number of spaces in the park and by the number of months in forever, because it gets built into the rent forever, it's a lot of money. What happens in that case? Well, the city sent a polite letter to the park saying you're charging more than you should. Want to make sure you know this is the right amount. And that's it. They're still charging it. They haven't done anything about it. The park has not done anything. Finally, a case that this council may have heard about. In one park earlier this month, a very unfortunate crime happened. Homeowners who had taken their rent checks to the park office were informed that there had been a break-in at the office, and a number of those checks, a couple dozen it sounds like, were stolen. Some were checks, some were money orders. These are people who paid their rent and paid it on time. Those who had paid by check have a pretty easy remedy. You contact your bank, you put a stop payment on the check. Might cost you 30 or 40 bucks, but doesn't cost you the 600 or 800 that was the check was written for. And then you write another check to the park. But people who paid by money,
versus those that require council approval?
I would defer to your legal counsel on that. There will be certain things which I believe can be characterized as non-substantive amendments, which the council could have authority to implement. There are also other things which under the current ordinance are within the purview of the Rent Review Commission to adopt by resolution, clarification of language, certain definitions. But that's something I would defer to your city attorney to delve into the weeds on that. I am not an attorney, and I would not pretend to be one. Thank you.
Yes, that will be covered in detail in the later portion of this meeting.
Thank you. Just one quick question as we were going through, and I have other questions, but I'll wait for staff presentation. In your experience, how does one hire a hearing officer?
Very good question. Councilmember Cornejo, the city has procurement policies whereby it can hire any type of person, and typically requires a posting and a review of that person's qualifications once applications or bids are received. You would need to, of course, follow those provisions. But I think your question really has to do with where do you find them? Trust me, there are throughout the state of California a number of people. Some are retired lawyers, some are not, who conduct hearings on rent stabilization for mobile home parks ordinances for cities and counties, and for apartment rent control ordinances for cities and counties. There are a lot of professionals out there who do this. And once you put the word out there, you'll get applicants. There's a couple of people here in Ventura County who have experience doing these things. You want someone who has experience in conducting administrative hearings and who has experience in rent stabilization, preferably in mobile home, but not necessarily, and who understands what kind of evidence needs to be sifted through. But they're out there.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Any other questions from council? Okay. Back to you, Mr. Mason.
Thank you again.
And we have another park representative.
A park owner representative. We just heard from residents representatives.
Hello, my name is Nick. I'm representing River's Edge ownership. There are two of us that would like to speak, but we'll be pretty brief if that's okay, rather than just one of us. So a couple of things that you guys had mentioned for the stated goals of the rent control ordinance are to protect existing residents from sharp increases, which I understand, to promote housing stability, which I also understand. And one thing that you guys did not mention, but Mr. Lawson did mention, is to preserve the official and existing affordable housing stock. And that is one thing that your ordinance does not address. So your current ordinance does two of these. It does prevent sharp increases and it does promote housing stability. However, by placing your finger on the rent scale, the housing price has skyrocketed. This is why you see trailers in River's Edge with an average resale price of $250,000 when the intrinsic value of the trailer is closer to $20,000 to $50,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is the housing price so much? Why are mobile homes that were built in the 1970s selling for so much money? And the reality is they're selling access to cheap rent. Okay, so what that does is drives up the housing cost. A $250,000 loan with somewhere around 10 to 12% interest is going to run you a mortgage payment well north of $2,000. Plus, you have to pay rent on top of that. Average rents in River's Edge are about $500. So $2,000 plus leaves the park in the form of mortgage payments, goes out to banks at 10% interest, and leaves the park owner with a shortfall of income generated in order to continue to maintain that park going forward. This is a problem, and this is why the housing price is going up. If market rent sits somewhere around $1,000 to $1,200 with your ordinance over that same period of 20 years, that rent will sit somewhere around $1,700. So you still haven't even approached the cost of the mortgage of a home, but it will actually bring the housing price down, which makes a lower barrier to entry for residents that are trying to move into the park. So an important component of this rent control ordinance should be vacancy decontrol, which is the ability to reset rents to market rate when a resident leaves. That allows a one-time catch-up for park owners who've dealt with suppressed years for decades, a one-time catch-up, okay? And so what I would encourage staff to do is twofold. One is check cities that have vacancy decontrol provisions in them. And what I would encourage you to see is how many fair return challenges are made in ordinances that allow for full vacancy decontrol. You will find it's very few, if any at all. Fair returns are extremely costly for all parties involved, for the residents, for the park owners, and for the city. It takes a ton of staff time. So how can you avoid fair return hearings? The reality is with 75% of CPI, when we know that costs go up far faster than CPI, this ordinance has been in place for 34 years. So a fraction of CPI increases annually begets only one thing, which is a sharp increase in rent at some point. Otherwise, the business fails. A business that can't keep pace with inflation cannot stay in business. So there has to be a safety valve for park owners at some point to catch up on these decades of suppressed rent. So my question to you guys is, if there is a provision for vacancy decontrol, will you even see fair return challenges? And the answer in my experience is no. We've never done a fair return hearing in a jurisdiction that allows for full vacancy decontrol. So I would implore staff to look into those provisions. And if that provision is in place, what it does is it adds that third missing element to your ordinance, which is preserving affordable housing. It keeps the housing costs down. It allows the park to catch up on suppressed rents, and it allows money for the park to reinvest without having to do sharp increases on residents in order to keep pace with what is a CPI number that we know doesn't affect the reality on the ground. So the last proposal that Carl made was that you need to amend this ordinance to reflect new economic realities. Vacancy decontrol does just that. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and Mobile Home Park residents. My name is Jared Gonzalez, and I represent the Western Manufactured Housing Communities Association, or WMA for short. And WMA is the statewide trade association that represents mobile home park owners and operators in the state of California, and also here in Santa Paula. There's just two things I want to mention as the council and city contemplates changes to the rent control ordinance. The first, and Mr. Lawson brought it up, but I have a slight variation of it, but is to replace the rent review commission with a hearing officer, as opposed to just a hearing officer with the current commission, but to replace the rent review commission with a hearing officer. We believe this will benefit the city and the residents as much as owners. It can reduce the city's administrative burden, legal exposure, and often little or net cost to the city's budget, while giving all parties faster and more consistent decisions. When you look at, there's a complexity mismatch. You saw talk about the NOI process, right? So it's calculating base year gross income, operating expenses, CPI adjustments, and that's closer to a financial and legal review than it is a policy decision. And a hearing officer with a legal background or a mediator or someone with that sort of background, their experience is better equipped to apply these standards than a rotating panel of lay volunteers. And so what that will do will create some consistency and predictability, because as years go by, a standing hearing officer builds consistent body of rulings over time. And a three-person commission that turns over every few years risks inconsistent outcomes between applications and similar facts. And so a fairness concern for residents as much as it is for owners. Then there's efficiency and cost. It requires, we talked about, you saw the NOI process, the public hearing, they're hearing within 75 days and a written decision within 90 days. And that could be reachable, but it's dependent on commissioner availability and a quorum. So a dedicated hearing officer can be scheduled more efficiently, reducing delay and legal costs for both sides. I think it's good for the city and all parties, not just owners. A hearing officer shifts the administrative burden away from city staff. Mr. Lawson brought up, how Mr. Mason's job is burdened by this. This would definitely help with that. Volunteer commissioner, it shifts him from the city staff and volunteer commissioners onto qualified contracted professionals. So we think that, several cities fund the entire hearing process through sometimes administrative fees, but it's going to be faster, more consistent decisions, and also benefits residents and park owners and the city. This is also a common practice, so this is not novel. Many cities have it, I believe San Jose, Mountain View, Fremont, Palmdale, I think maybe Oxnard, but I'm not exactly sure if I recall that one. I think it's also important to know that these are the same standards. The standards won't change. All that's changing is who applies the changes. And then the next item was brought up by Mr. Ubaldi, and that's the full vacancy decontrol, the ability to increase rent when a home is sold. What's important about this is the current restrictions on the rent are creating a struggle for park owners in order to, with all the rising costs. So there's CPI, and CPI is tied to the annual increase. CPI captures things like food costs and transportation and medical expenses. But what it doesn't capture are the rising costs that park owners have to pay, the insurance that are going up, labor costs, construction costs, the cost of finance, the cost to borrow money. Those are not captured by CPI. And so it's important in order to maintain parks to be able to, as Mr. Ubaldi said, if the scale is being pressed on the rent increases, there has to be another way to be able to, for park owners to maintain their parks. And I think what's important about vacancy decontrol is that it has no impact on the current residents. These are people who are coming in eyes wide open. So when they come to, when they buy their home, they know what the price of the home is. They know what the rent is. And so when they sign and they decide to do that, they decide to do that. So I think that's really important. It's also important to know that it will reduce the pressure. They talked about the NOI and all the hearings. This will be like a release valve that could reduce the amount of owners who are looking for an NOI. As Mr. Ubaldi said, he's been in jurisdictions where there has been vacancy decontrol, and there have been very few, if any, NOI applications. I will also say that there's recent precedent of cities who have had no full vacancy decontrol, who have just changed their ordinance. Upland in May of 2026, they just changed their ordinance to full vacancy decontrol. The city of Lancaster at the end of 2025 also went from very little decontrol to full vacancy decontrol. So this is something that I think that cities are really looking into as a way to balance the scale between ensuring that rents there are no sharp increases, but at the same time allowing park owners to maintain their parks and create a situation where there are affordable home ownership opportunities for people in their cities. I also want to just say in closing that WMA and all of the park owners in the city of Santa Paula stand ready to meet with any of the council members, any of the city staff. We look forward to this collaborative process, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Any questions from the council? Okay, thank you. Continue.
Thank you very much. Yes, and just to help everybody understand what vacancy decontrol is, that occurs when they're usually in the context of mobile home parks, when the mobile home is sold to a new owner and that new owner becomes a resident. So full vacancy decontrol would mean the owner can determine the next resident's rent for that space without any limits on that rent. And public comment period will come later. If you have questions, we can you can submit those at that time. We'll take questions later. All right, so next we're going to go into the legal discussion of what the 400 Craig Drive Homeowners Association proposed, which Mr. Lawson already covered. And first, we want to, again, understand the framework we're operating here. We have the elections code limitation, and that's what we've already discussed. And then next we'll go into what the commission can implement on its own authority. They have regulatory authority to carry out the ordinance. Then we'll talk about what the likely substantive voter level changes will be needed. Then following that, we will go into the anti-harassment ordinance suggestion that the 400 Craig Drive proposed. And then after that, we will discuss what is low risk to go forward. We'll summarize what is low risk for the city to implement now. And then council will be given some policy choices to discuss. Thank you. See, next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, our elections code only allows non-substantive parts of the ordinance to be changed without voter approval. So we'll need to avoid changes that affect the substantive rights of residents and owners, the standards applied, remedies, and decision-making authority. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through areas that we can implement now, and then areas that are best for a ballot measure, and then the separate anti-harassment protection ordinance. So first, what can we implement now under the commission's regulatory authority? So one of the suggestions that come up from both park owners and residents as a hearing officer, that is possible. However, the ordinance requires the commission to make final decisions, any decision. So what we would do is have a hearing officer function as an agent of the commission and not its own hearing body. The hearing officer could conduct the evidentiary hearing and make proposed findings and recommendations, but then the commission is going to maintain that final authority over any sort of rent increase applications. And they will continue to hear appeals from the rent administrator. The rent administrator will also need to maintain his authority because that's what's expressly in the ordinance that cannot be changed. We can also include in the commission regulations some of the more specific details and procedures, like adopting a record, what evidence can be accepted, what evidence should be served, subpoenas. All of this, of course, will need to be also reviewed for legal separately, not just whether it's something that can be done under our election code restrictions. And also having bilingual notices can also be included in our regulations because that does not conflict with our ordinance. And another thing I heard from the Mr. Lawson was ambiguities in our ordinance. That can be corrected to the extent it does not conflict with the clear meaning of what the ordinance has stated. So one of those clarifying changes in terminology would be what a change in CPI means, that residents and homeowners are not tenants, but they're tenants. They're referred to residents or homeowners instead of tenants. And another low risk change is that the resident representative can be either the one elected by the residents or the if they have an HOA board in place, it would be the secretary and the president who would receive notices from the city. What was proposed in the HOA's amendments was a more murky deadline to notify the city of who they selected. The ordinance gives a January 3rd deadline, but the proposal was to say also include as practicable thereafter. We need to include January 31st as the absolute deadline. Then another suggestion made by HOA was to clarify our existing 30-day application review for completeness and notice of that application. It was a great suggestion. Right now we have a 30-day deadline to do both, to deem it complete and also give notice to park residents. But the suggestion from the HOA was to determine completeness in 15 days and then after that give notice within 15 days. And that still preserves the 30-day period in the ordinance. So that can be implemented through our regulations. So you'll see for the recommended hearing officer model, there will be an evidentiary hearing. The hearing officer will develop a recommendation, and then the commission will take final action. And this is a great idea that I think will, again, preserve a lot of city time and costs. And then here are the substantive changes that are likely to require voter approval. So that includes rent adjustments and remedies. So changing the HOA, changing the existing 75% of CPI formula up, but no greater than 7% is our existing ordinance. The HOA is asking to change that into more of a tiered system. So that's something that we're going to need to take to the voters. Another suggestion was to turn the automatic annual CPI adjustment into a mandatory application. There is precedent for that, but again, that's something substantive that the voters will need to vote on. And then the other rent adjustment and remedy change is creating a process for a separate itemized billing of utility costs. So that also will need to submit it to voters. That is something that our ordinance allows to be included now, but it doesn't state how it should be included. And the state law gives the owners the ability to do that if they include it in their lease. Then another topic is capital improvement recovery. So the suggestion from the HOA was to limit recovery to 50%. So that would only allow 50% recovery through a pass-through of capital improvements. Again, that's substantive, and that'll have to go to the voters. There's a request to delete from the ordinance the advanced capital improvement determination. Right now, owners can ask the rent administrator to tell them if a capital improvement can be passed through and what amount. And then the other substantive change was deleting the existing service reduction remedy and current appeal process. So I'm sorry, it should only be, there is no appeal process except at the rent administrator level. So this would, they're asking to delete a current suggestion or the current ordinance's option to seek a service reduction and then followed by commensurate reduction in rent. So that allows the park owners, whenever a service reduction occurs, they must reduce a commensurate amount in their rent. Now, The other topic is the fair return, in which we discussed that in great detail. This is something that is going to need to also be put to the voters, the maintenance of net operating income formula. This is something that financial experts and rent stabilization experts should probably be given the ability to first advise the city on and analyze. So that's something that we should, the city will want to consider, but again, something for the ballot. And then the other topic that would be appropriate for the ballot is a protest mechanism that the HOA suggested. In that mechanism, it allows the residents to submit a protest before a rent increase application is considered. So what would happen is an application is processed through the city, then the residents are notified, and then they have the option to protest that increase within 60 days. So again, that's a very substantive amendment that's proposed. And then, let's see. And then the other change that would need to go to the voters is transferring rulemaking power from the commission and the rent administrator to the city council. That is not advisable at this time until it gets to the voters. And then we can move on to the next slide. So what we can do now is consider a standalone ordinance to prevent harassment, not just for mobile home tenants, but for all tenants. So what we will do is, the council can look at the proposal from the HOA and then use that as a starting point to consider what protection should go in place in a standalone ordinance. So what the ordinance would do, borrowing from the proposal from the HOA, is it would create substantive duties and evidentiary presumptions, defenses, penalties, and private remedies. And this would also provide unlawful detainer defenses and a 12-month retaliation presumption. But that would also, we want to be able to make sure that that's legal and would require a separate state law preemption analysis. There are also recommendations to prevent interference with a mobile home sale, and that will need to be analyzed against existing law under the civil code that governs interference with private sales and purchaser approval. Then we can move on to the next slide. So here are the low risk changes that I covered earlier, just summarized here. So we can implement commission regulations on hearings, so procedure, hearing officer use. We can also incorporate regulations regarding how to calculate the capital improvements and amortization, as long as it does not conflict with what our code says now. We can establish procedures to itemize utility billing. And then we can also have that correspond to appropriate rent adjustments. But again, it must comply with our current ordinance and state law. Then we can also implement administrative clarifications. So how to administer the completeness timeline and notice timeline. We can include the bilingual notices, standardize our forms and our filing instructions. And we can also adjust some fees, but that will have to be done through council resolution and then incorporated into the regulations. And again, we can then move into a standalone anti-harassment ordinance for development. Next slide, please. Now for council, I'm going to pull up this slide again, but these are the areas for policy discussion. After this portion of the meeting ends, we're going to allow time for public comment, but I'll bring this slide back up again for purposes of discussion. So the function of council tonight is to give staff direction of what should be developed for possible voter consideration. So we have the annual CPI adjustment changes that were proposed by the HOA. We have capital improvements in changing that to allow for only 50% recovery. We have, again, consideration of a fair return methodology, but the technicality and detail of that type of methodology is best reserved for a consultant experienced in rent stabilization to understand the consequences of a given formula. And then last, I'll have council consider whether a resident protest right should be created and whether to create a hearing officer commission appeal structure instead of having the commission use the hearing officer as its agent and kind of like a staff recommender, a fact finder and a recommending staff person at the commission. And then we have, finally, the existing service reduction that the HOA is requesting be removed. I'm not sure why that was asked to be removed, but this would be removing the existing rent reduction requirement when services or amenities are reduced or discontinued. So I will end it there. Yes.
Regarding the recommendations up there for voter-approved items to consider, can you explain a timeline potentially for that? Would that require a special election?
Council has the option of holding a special election or waiting for the regular election in 2028.
Okay.
So we can now go into public comment and then we'll return to these slides for council discussion.
Do we have any other questions from council for our attorney? I just had one, Monica, and that is, it was brought up by Jared Gonzalez, to try to eliminate the Rent Control Commission to have a hearing officer. But if I hear correctly, per our policy, it's still required, we're still required to have as a final say the Rent Control Commission, correct? Even if you have a hearing officer.
The commission would have to be the final decision maker, but they may use a hearing officer to help guide and develop the facts for them and prepare recommendations for them.
Okay, and does every city have to have a Rent Control Commission? Or can some cities have a hearing officer?
Yeah, it's not required.
Okay.
It's one of models that cities use.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to go into public comment. And as I mentioned before, please, we request no clapping or booing. If you could use nonverbal communication, raise your hand, thumbs up, wave, or a thumbs down. We'll give you each 3 minutes. We have several here, and then we'll check afterwards if we have anybody waiting online. We're going to start with Gladys Valdovinos, who's going to be followed by Angel Garza. Where are they coming? To that microphone, or are we passing a mic to them? To the podium? Yeah, if you would just walk up, and I guess you'll have to face the audience. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Gladys, and I'm the president of the Resident Association, 400 Craig Drive Mobile Homeowners. I wanted to thank you guys for this meeting that we have tonight. And as you heard, We've heard many suggestions this evening about proposals to amend the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. We want to urge you to direct your staff to take prompt action to update and amend the ordinance. This is because the current ordinance is worded in such a way that in order for any change to impact the rent increase application process for next year, any changes to the ordinance must be enacted by November of this year. If you need to hold a special election, please do so as soon as possible. So any delay in making the urgently needed changes means that the corporate investor-owned parks will be able to take advantage of the current loopholes in the ordinance to file massive rent increase applications before the end of 2026. And amending the ordinance after that won't help the homeowners nor the city very much. The need to amend and update the ordinance has been discussed by council for over a year by now. It is time to take action. So we respectfully request our city council to please direct your staff to make this a top priority and to return to you with proposed amendment language before October. So we ask this on behalf of all of the homeowners in all of the parks in Santa Paula. Thank you for hearing our community and for your attentiveness to this matter.
Thank you, Ms. Valdovinos. We have now Angel Garza, who will be followed by Nick Ubali.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking City Council and City staff for putting this meeting/workshop together. I originally was going to talk about the checks that got stolen that Mr. Lawson briefly brought up, but since he already talked about it, I would just like to make a brief little addition based on what the park representatives mentioned. To me, it seemed that when the topic of the full vacancy decontrol was brought up, it seemed like the representatives made it seem like they would be operating at a loss under a rent stabilization ordinance, an updated one. That is not what anyone here is demanding. Everyone here wants the parks to make money. We just want there to be enough evidence provided to show that the rents being charged are being fair for everyone. And if an updated ordinance is able to achieve this goal, I don't see any need for a full vacancy decontrol, which in my opinion was kind of presented in a very disingenuous way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garza. So we have now Nick Ubali, who will be followed by Tiffany Orr. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, Nick, you already spoke. Thank you, Nick. Tiffany Orr then. Thank you.
Thank you, council, for having us here. Mine basically is about the overage that the park is still actually doing. By now, you've probably read the front page of the article of the Star about the impact of corporate ownership of the parks we live in. Here is an example of what happened when an out-of-town corporation investors buy up mobile home parks in Santa Paula. They just ignore the law. Every year, Mr. Mason calculates the permissible annual rent increase the parks can impose based on Southern California inflation rates. He then notifies the parks in writing they can increase the rent for the next year. Mr. Mason notified all the parks that the presumable increase this year was 2.25. But our park raised our rate by 2 3/4. Mr. Mason then wrote the corporation, the owners of the park, a polite letter advising them of this mistake, requesting their correction. Our homeowner association also wrote a polite letter requesting the same. You will never guess what the response from the park was. Silence. They have been actually overcharging us for 4 months, and it was notified to the park manager in July. We still got it in August. We'll see what comes in September. They ignore the law. They thumb their nose at the city. They keep overcharging us. They have been overcharging us every month for the past 4 months. They keep on doing so. Our out-of-town corporate park owners, investors are essentially telling the city and is proud to stand or to pound sand. And by doing so, they ignore the city council and your ordinance. These are the type of corporations that you're dealing with, and it is time to amend the ordinance and put a stop to these anti-homeowners and communities. They knew what they were getting into when they bought this park. They can get a return, but they knew that they had all the financials. So it's not on, we just need the city to update it. I've lived in this park for 34 years. I was there when the ordinance was put in 1992. And it is sad that we have to do this after all this time. Thank you.
What mobile home park is that, Vince?
I'm in River's Edge, also known as the 400 Mobile Estates.
All right, thank you, Ms. Soar. Next, we'll have Jen Hernandez, who will be followed by Amalia Ochoa.
Good evening, Mayor Juarez and members of the council. My name is Jen Hernandez. I'm an associate policy director with CAUSE. We are a base building organization committed to social, economic, and environmental justice for working class and immigrant communities in California's Central Coast. We build grassroots power through community organizing, leadership development, coalition building, civic engagement, policy research, and advocacy. And for the past decade, CAUSE has worked with our base and partners to achieve housing justice throughout Ventura County, focusing on rent affordability and strong protections against displacement and eviction. We'd like to acknowledge the efforts of council and staff to amend this existing mobile home rent stabilization ordinance and share appreciation for the opportunity to provide comment and recommendations for draft ordinance language, which we shared earlier via email. Staff and council should have those in your inbox. Santa Paula mobile home residents, as you've heard, have experienced a range of disruptions in recent years, ranging from attempts to substantially increase their rent to targeted harassment. And while these residents have achieved what many strive for, affordable home ownership, the safety and security of that life is being threatened by corporate park owners and managers who are taking advantage of loopholes in the existing law. For the past 2 years, CAUSE is organized with these residents who have been directly impacted. They've shared their experiences, the impacts to their well-being, and they have led our process to draft our proposal for the ordinance. As part of that process, we've also collaborated with a nonprofit organization called Movement Legal to bring the following recommendations to you. And what I'll share now is a summary of what we provided, like full draft language to you all earlier today. We urge council to direct staff to amend the ordinance to include an annual allowable rent adjustment of 3% or 60% of CPI, whichever is lower. We support the designation of a hearing officer to conduct evidentiary hearings, as well as maintaining the Rent Review Commission, expanding it to be 5 members, with 2 of those members being residents, as well as having expanded investigative and appellate powers. The establishment of a rent registry, tracking lawful rent for each space and providing residents with a tool to verify whether any rent increase is lawful. The establishment of a violation registry, tracking complaints, findings, and enforcement actions, creating an ongoing public accountability record for park owners with escalating consequences for chronic violators. The elimination of rent banking and vacancy rent adjustment. The ability of residents to petition for rent reduction when services are reduced or discontinued without a corresponding rent adjustment. Explicit civil right of action for harassment with strengthened protections for harassment and retaliation, including for eviction, as well as codified anti-discrimination and anti-intimidation language with the clear state and local remedies outlined. We recognize that you
Ms.
all may be
Hernandez,
working on
your
a-
time is up. If you could just close
I'm
it up.
just going to finish, my sentence. Thank you. This is the last recommendation. We recognize that you all are thinking of working on a standalone ordinance, but we think it's really important that you also codify in this update so that it can be clear, or there's a clear mechanism for understanding whether an eviction is related to harassment or retaliation. We look forward to continuing to work with you all. We urge you to reach out directly to us and our colleagues at Movement Legal. They've worked on dozens of mobile home ordinances that are legally sound. And we believe that the recommendations that we've made will ensure that residents can maintain safe, stable, and affordable housing while offering park owners fair, transparent, and legally sound way to conduct business in the city.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. Next, we have Amalia Ochoa, who will be followed by Hazen Gonzalez.
Buenas tardes, miembros del Concilio Municipal de Santa Paula. Mi nombre es Amalia Ochoa, líder comunitaria, activista y delegada de Comité con Causa. Hoy estoy aquí para pedirles una ordenanza y estabilización de los alquileres para todos los residentes de casas móviles de Santa Paula. Y también que la ciudad adopte protecciones fuertes y justas, que los proteja de aumentos de alquiler excesivo, que no pueden pagar y que les permita vivir con seguridad y dignidad. Apoyo un límite de aumento anual, sea el menor, entre el 3% a 60% del PCE. Y no se acumulen en aumentos de años anteriores. Como líderes, esto es muy importante porque tengo muchos años luchando para un control de renta y protecciones de renta en Santa Paula y mi comunidad de Santa Paula. He hablado con cientos de familias, incluyendo personas de tercera edad, retirados del campo, tan preocupados de perder sus hogares y terminar en la calle por altos costos de nuestra economía. También les pido al Consejo que tome la mejor decisión y medidas de cambios más modernas, justas, de un control de renta y protección en Santa Paula. Es justo y necesario. Housing is a human right. Thank you.
I'll be interpreting real quick for Amalia. Good afternoon, members of the Santa Paula City Council. My name is Amalia Ochoa, community leader, activist, and committee delegate at CAUSE. Today, I am here for an ordinance and rent stabilization for all mobile home residents of Santa Paula. And also that the city adopts strong and fair protections that protect residents from excessive rent increases they cannot afford and to allow them to live safely and with dignity. I support a limit on annual increases that is the lowest between 3 or 60% of CPI, and that increases from previous years are not accumulated. As a leader, this is very important because I have spent many years fighting for rent control and protections for my entire community in Santa Paula. I have spoken with hundreds of families, including elderly people and retired farm workers, who are so worried about losing their homes and ending up on the street because of the high cost of our economy. I also ask the council to make the best decision and that fair, modern changes to rent control and protection in Santa Paula are just and necessary. Housing is a human right. Thank you.
Gracias, Amalia. Okay, now we have Hazen Gonzalez, to be followed by Ricardo Soto.
Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. I just came to say a couple comments. I'll be interpreting myself in Spanish and English, so I'm going to start with Spanish. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Hazen y soy miembro de Causa. Soy un estudiante de Santa Paula, está en su último año. Soy residente de Santa Paula. Estoy aquí porque la ordenanza de algunos alquileres de casas móviles afecta directamente a nuestra comunidad. Como residente e hijo de renteros, me preocupa la estabilidad de nuestros alquileres y la posibilidad de que los aumentos de estos sean más difíciles de conseguir, para que las familias puedan seguir viviendo en Santa Paula, ya que si esto no se hace nada al respecto, será casi imposible que una familia pueda seguir viviendo en nuestro pueblo, obligando a muchas familias a mudarse, afectando moralmente y económicamente a nuestro pueblo de forma muy negativa. El apoyo a un límite más estricto en los aumentos de alquileres y también protecciones claras contra el acoso y las represalias, ya que si no, como mencioné anteriormente, los padres y madres no serán capaces de darle el pan de cada día a sus hijos o a aquellos que dependen de ellos, ya que todo el dinero sería destinado al alquiler solo para seguir teniendo un techo sobre sus casas. Then I'll be passing to English real quick. Good evening. My name is Hassan, and I'm a member of CAUS and a senior in Santa Paula High School. I am a resident of Santa Paula. I am here because the mobile home rent ordinance directly affects our community. As a resident and a child of renters, I am concerned about rent stability and the need to keep rent increasing manageable so that families can continue living in Santa Paula. If nothing is done about this, it will become nearly impossible for families to remain here, forcing many to move away and negatively impacting our town, both emotionally and economically. I support strict limits on rent increase as well as clear protection against harassment and retaliation. Without these measurements, as I mentioned earlier, parents will not be able to provide for their children or those who depend on them, because all the money will be towards rent and keep a roof over their heads. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Now we have Ricardo Soto, who will be followed by Carolina Valenciano.
Buenas noches. Buenas noches, señores del Consejo Municipal. Mi nombre es Ricardo Soto. Pertenezco a la organización Causa por 2 años como voluntario para los residentes de Santa Paula. Estoy aquí para pedirles una asistencia, forma real, para presentar una enmienda para presentar quejas de los residentes de los parques y de casas móviles y trailers. Que la enmienda sea una forma real, que la propuesta incluya un proceso gratuito para que los residentes puedan presentar denuncias, acoso, con audiencias y posibles sanciones a los manejadores y dueños de parques y casas trailers móviles, porque los residentes no tengan que pasar por acoso y amenaza de los manejadores de los parques de Santa Paula. Necesitamos una manera clara para que los residentes tengamos que presentar cómo protegernos y qué pasaría después de una queja. Porque yo tuve una situación por no tener algo que me ayudara legal, estuve en riesgo que me desalojaran de un lugar donde vivo por pedir a los dueños arreglos al lugar. Ustedes como representantes del Consejo Municipal podrían ayudarnos a actualizar la ordenanza con más protecciones. Gracias.
Good afternoon, members of City Council. My name is Ricardo Soto, and I have been a volunteer with the organization of Cause for 2 years, working with the residents of Santa Paula. And I'm here to ask that there be a real way to submit an amendment to file complaints from residents of mobile home and trailer parks. The amendment should be a real way for the proposal to include a free process for the residents to file harassment complaints with hearings and possible sanctions for managers and owners of the mobile home and trailer parks, so that residents don't have to go through harassment and threats from the managers of the Santa Paula parks. We need a clear way for residents to file complaints and about how to protect themselves and what happens after we file a complaint. I had a situation, and because I didn't have anything policy-wise to help me legally, I was at risk of being evicted from the place where I live for asking the owners to make repairs to the place. As council representatives, you could help us update the ordinance with more protections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. Now we have Carolina Valenciano, who will be followed by Citlali Salgado.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Carolina Valenciano. Soy residente de las Casas Móviles de Santa Paula en Bedwick Road, donde vivo desde hace 8 años. Mi comentario en general solamente en este día es para pedirles de favor en que al trabajar en el cambio de la ordenanza, que ya es un poco antigua, les pido que piensen en hacer un bien no solo los dueños de los parques, sino que también piensen en ayudar a sus residentes, ya que la mayoría de las veces los beneficiarios son los propietarios del parque y los más afectados somos los residentes, ya que muchas veces el aumento de las rentas es muy alto. Y que también haya una protección sobre represalias que muchas veces los dueños de los parques toman hacia sus residentes cuando alzan la voz sobre sus afectaciones. Me gustaría que al modificar la ordenanza piensen el bien de todos, tanto de los dueños de los parques como de sus residentes. Les agradezco su atención.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolina Valenciano, a resident of the mobile homes on Beckwith Road here in Santa Paula, where I have lived for 8 years. My comment today is to ask you, as you work on changing the ordinance, which is already a bit old, to consider doing good not only for the park owners, but also for the residents of those parks. Since most of the time the park owners benefit the most while the residents are the most affected, especially given the often substantial rent increases. And there should also be protection against the retaliation that park owners often take against their residents when they speak out about the impacts. I would like you to consider the good of everyone when modifying the ordinance, both the owners and us residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carolina Valenciano. Now we have Citlali Salgado. And that's our last public speaker.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Citlali, and I'm the cause organizer here in Santa Paula. I'm here tonight because we want to make sure the process of updating Santa Paula's mobile home rent stabilization ordinance is transparent, accessible, and centered on all the residents who are directly affected by it. As of August 21st, I was not able to find any information about this workshop on the city's website or social media. I think that's an important concern. When the city is discussing an ordinance that directly affects the housing stability of Santa Paula residents, residents should have clear and public information about opportunities to participate. At the same time, I do want to recognize that residents were notified in a timely manner in both English and Spanish by mail, and that the communication was in accessible language. That kind of language access is important, and we appreciate it. At CAUSE, our adult committee has been doing our own work to make sure that the proposed ordinance reflects what the residents actually need. We have been working on ordinance language that includes priorities such as a strong rent cap, protections against harassment and retaliation, stronger enforcement, language access, transparency, and meaningful resident participation in the rent review process. The ordinance language was developed in collaboration with the California Center for Movement Legal Services, a nonprofit that supports communities in drafting and advocating for policies that prevent displacement and preserve affordable and safe housing. The staff at Movement Legal have worked on multiple mobile home rent stabilization ordinances throughout the state that continue to stand up to legal scrutiny. Their legal expertise has helped us think through how the protections uplifted by our leaders can be incorporated into the ordinance. And they have also offered to meet with the city as you draft the update to this ordinance. We are eager to collaborate with the city on this process, and we're not asking the city to do this work alone. We're not asking the city to start from scratch either. There are residents who have been organizing around these issues, and there are legal resources available to help move this work forward. And we would be more than happy to connect the city with Alex from Movement Legal so that you can have a conversation about the proposed language and how we can work together. Ultimately, we want an ordinance that feels real and has comprehensive protections for mobile home residents, protections that address rent increases and also harassment and retaliation. They're equally important protections that come with strong enforcement mechanisms as well. Just as importantly, we want a process where residents know what is happening, know how they can participate, and receive information in a language they can understand. CAUSE and our adult committee are ready to continue working with the city, and we hope you will take us up on that opportunity to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Citlali Salgado, and thank you for translating from Spanish to English. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to submit a public speaker comment card? Oh, we have one more.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one here from Carl Lawson was the last one. So if anyone else has one to turn in to me, that would be great. Also, Mayor, since I need the microphone to let you know, I've requested several times for someone online to be able to raise their hand if they wish to speak. No one is doing that. So since I'm on the speaker, if any of the people who are online through this Zoom, if you wish to speak, now is the time to raise your hand. Thank you.
Okay, we'll let Mr. Lawson speak, and then if anybody else raises their hand, let us know, please.
Thank you so much, honorable member, mayors of the council, and the city clerk. Very quickly, I wanted to clarify something which was commented upon after my presentation, regarding why the homeowners association proposed to eliminate the provision for decreasing rents when services are decreased. That is because the current ordinance actually doesn't require parks to apply to decrease rents. It refers to an application, but it doesn't require them to decrease rents. What really goes on is they simply decrease services. Okay. We propose to eliminate that, not in isolation, but in conjunction with the other proposal to add a procedure whereby homeowners can initiate a hearing if their services have been decreased. Okay, so if that's not going to be part of what could go forward, we would certainly want that current language, as ineffective as it is, to continue. Second, I learned something. Every time I come to a meeting, you learn something. The discussion on vacancy decontrol was very, very illuminating. And the representatives of Harmony Communities Incorporated and the statewide Park Owner Association very eloquently stated their point of view. The key sentence, though, was that, and I wrote it down, was that implementing vacancy decontrol does not impact current residents at all, close quote. If someone is selling their mobile home, the purchaser will be looking at what space net they're going to pay when they make their offer for a price of the home. The higher the space rent, the lower the offer to sell, the lower the selling price will be. So it is one part of the equation which was left out. Whether that's a good thing or not depends on your point of view, but it's definitely an economic fact. After those statements were made, someone spoke to me out in the lobby and said, whoa, I didn't know the city ordinance prohibits them from raising rents when mobile homes are sold, because in my park, new buyers are charged $200 more on sale. And that homeowner said that at the time they purchased their home in another park here in Santa Paula, there was a $200 rent increase. Now, I don't know this, I can't confirm that. I can just say that's what the homeowner said. And it was since 1992. So the question is, are homeowners, is that provision of the ordinance being respected throughout the city? And the proposal that CAUSE made for a registry and a system whereby people can verify whether their rents are correct has great merit because of situations like that. And that is all. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And I'd really like to thank all the residents that came out tonight and gave public comment. Ms. Lashaw, do we have anybody waiting in the waiting room? All right, thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 6, council discussion and direction. So the council has heard the presentation and public speakers. I open up the floor to anybody that would like to speak from the council.
I actually have a couple questions, if I can, before we get into discussion. Are there, it's really hard, I can't see you all down there. I know both in one of the presentations and the public speakers mentioned the stolen checks. Is that anything that we would include in anything, or is that something that is outside of the scope of the city?
At this point, there has been a police report and an investigation involved in that, but beyond that, we don't have really any purview in that.
And then if someone was being charged more in a CPI increase over what the ordinance allows.
What we would, I would encourage people to reach out to me, reach out to the department, and we can check against records and then enforce that with the park owner.
And then is it true that under the current ordinance, the new, a new owner should
$25 fee.
but not $200
No.
extra a month in perpetuity? Do we have any records at City Hall that could be, or what would be the process for comparing anti-harassment ordinance have provisions for enforcement? And do we know if there are other cities in Ventura County that have those?
Yes, other cities do have those. The real key to kind of the provisions of enforcement is identifying what is specifically defined as harassment and then having basically the consequences that are associated with one of those. I'll let Ms. Castillo talk about those.
Yeah, and we should also consider a due process analysis and compare it against a constitutional law to make sure we know what's permissible.
But one thing I did want to add, I recognize the challenge of putting an ordinance together that has consequences, but not the resources to enact those consequences. So that's something we need to look at clearly.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I'd like to mirror a couple of Vice Mayor's cross-site questions, because those were mine as well. I'm intrigued by the hearing officer. I'm very interested in creating efficiencies, both for the residents and for our staff. So if that turns out to be a cost saver or a time saver for everyone, I think we really need to pursue that as best we can within our legal realm of, or what we're allowed. The other is my concern. Over a year ago, I recall we were talking about renters' rights. So I'd like to know if renters' rights, those same rights, which there are state and federal laws, are all, if the mobile home renters are under those exact same laws, or are there specific laws with regards to mobile home
There are
owners?
specific laws in regards to mobile home that some of them will be within our ordinance. Other ones are under the State Department of Housing and Community Development. There is other state legislation relative to other rental properties, apartments and houses that are completely separate from mobile home. Mobile home kind of fits in its own category.
That's what I wanted to know, is if there's a special designation or category for that. So I would like to make sure we're paying attention to that. At the time, we decided, as far as renters' rights, that we would rely on the states, and that we didn't feel that we had the resources to create an enforcement agency within our own city. So that's something to think about. I'm not saying no. It's something to be examined, both on cost and whether we could actually enforce something that we put in place. And then the other one, I'm not saying for or against, but if you have a possibility of a full vacancy decontrol, is it possible to do a partial vacancy decontrol? I think the risk with full vacancy decontrol is that it does put some sort of burden or discrimination or negativity on existing renters, or perhaps extra pressure to move, so that incoming can create more income. But I'm wondering if there's such a thing as allowing a small amount so that the park owners can make some revenue on that, so they don't have to come back every year or every other year and try and put that cost and burden on the existing residents. So I'm not looking for necessarily ways to give it all to one or the other, but if there's a balance so that they don't keep coming back with large increases named by capital improvements or whatever, that it could be placed on an incoming, but not a full vacancy decontrol. I don't think I'd be in favor of that, because again, it puts too much pressure on existing residents to move. I feel anyway. I live in a home. I live in a park as well. We own our land. We always look at the other parks because our houses are higher, because our fees are lower. But we know that in the other parks that the houses are lower because your fees are higher. So there's some sort of balance in there somehow. But so I'm very well aware of what happens to the parks and the costs. I think that's all I have for now.
Yes, to answer your question, there are ordinances, and you can allow for a percentage increase upon vacancy.
So that would be an ordinance measure or a percent that you could say. You wouldn't leave like wide open check, but you could say you could allow an increase for incoming by whatever, 5%, 10%,
Correct.
or whatever.
That's correct.
Okay, something to be considered anyway for that reason. Okay.
I have a couple questions, and then I'll save my comments till the end. But the first question I have is, I know one of the things that we discussed was the limitation or the number of times someone can apply for an increase. How does that fall into either council is able to amend that, or is that going to be required from the voter?
Well, we have provisions in place now that limit the number of times based on the nature of the application. So there's no fixed number of how often somebody can apply. But generally, there's a max of 12% increase per year. So that kind of functions as a limit on the number of applications that can come forward.
But I know there was some proposed language regarding limiting the frequency. And so if there was to be a stricter guideline, would that be possible through the council or through the voter?
That would be a voter
Okay.
measure.
Thank you for that. The second question is, you mentioned the increase, the max increase per year, right? That a park owner can raise the rent without having put in request through the city, right? Or through the application process. What is that max currently? And is there a limit on the number of times that can be done?
Well, right now, the only one that can happen without a commission is that annual increase. That's the only thing, and that's based on 75% of CPI with a maximum of 7%. That's the only increase that's allowed without some intervention of commission, hearing officer, or commissioner, hearing officer.
And that's just annually, right? They can
Every year.
continually
Yeah,
do
February.
that. Okay. And then we talked about harassment, and I know a lot of residents have gone through very specific issues regarding, how they're treated by park managers and so on. Who has jurisdiction currently for mobile home park owners regarding claims of discrimination?
It's kind of a balance between HCD and the county from the standpoint of like the DA's office from the standpoint of tenant violations. But a harassment ordinance would help a lot in that, in defining, especially, I'll tell you one thing real quickly. I did look at some sample harassment ordinances, and the ones that were really strong identified specific elements of harassment, things like shutting off utilities or just things that, because sometimes people they just assume that that's how they get treated. So I think it helps to substantiate a report and correction on that.
So the California Civil Rights Department doesn't play any role in having jurisdiction regarding discrimination claims for mobile home parks?
I would imagine yes. But
Could we look into that? Because
Absolutely.
I'm told by folks that there's a procedure that mobile home parks can follow regarding claims if they feel they're being discriminated. And I think we need to let our residents know what those existing mechanisms are that are already in place now.
One thing I do need to familiarize myself more with those options, but we did put information on the website for resources related to harassment and tenant rights. So on our website under mobile home, there's resources for that.
And the reason why I mentioned that is because 4 years ago, do you recall the community meeting we had with Santa Paula West, where we had claims from residents in terms of certain harassment and jurisdiction of who was responsible for cleaning up the barranca? And we were able to bring the county to inform all parties who has that jurisdiction. And we also, through that process, I found out through the assembly member that the California Civil Rights Division that I just mentioned was an important recourse for residents. If they would file a complaint, there's an investigation process in place if someone feels that they're being discriminated. So I think since we've had and we directed to mobile home park residents in the past on that, I think that we should align ourselves more with that as well. I'm totally in favor of the anti-harassment policy locally, but I'm also willing to promote any existing mechanisms from either the state, because they do have more resources than what we have locally.
Councilmember Chavez, I'll make sure that that's one of the elements on there. I'm not sure if it is, but I'll make sure it's on there on the website.
Something that I forgot to ask is something that I think is something that can be done without a vote. And you were talking about changing the calendar for January for the applications. The 15-day and the 15-day, is that correct? I think that was an option that was, so what I do want to understand is, are we talking about the actual applications and filing the financials? That the financials would have to be in by 15 days?
So there, I think you're referring to the procedure once a fair return application
Okay.
is submitted, and there, what was expressed tonight is that there's sometimes lots of documents come in,
Yeah.
and it's a pretty short turnaround. There's no specification of, it's a very short
Yeah.
period when
So
they
that's
can
my,
submit
that's my
it.
point.
Yes.
So that's something we can do without a vote, probably. Is that something you could
Correct.
pursue?
We could change the commission regulations, but it still has to operate within
The
the
30 day,
timeline of
I-
our
yeah.
ordinance.
I don't want to see what we saw and heard are those document dumps at the last minute with no time to review them. And
Yes.
so if that can be accelerated to require documents earlier so that if there's time to review and prepare, then I would absolutely be in favor, again, of efficiencies and courtesies to people that are trying to prepare. So from both
course.
sides.
Yes, and having a hearing officer ought to alleviate that a good deal.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And just a kind of a comment, but I know that I had expressed to staff earlier, but just to reiterate here, that we really do need to find the language of the original voter initiative, because I think that'll help us a lot in this process as we're moving forward.
Any other questions? Two questions that I have. One is, it was a suggestion to increase the rent control commission from 3 to 5, and that's just a language in the policy that will be contemplated, correct? If they increase rent commission from 3 to 5?
That's an ordinance change.
Ordinance change.
Mhm.
All right, and the second thing, I just want to piggyback on what Councilmember Chavez said, and that is, there's a lot of discussion about discrimination and anti-harassment. And, there comes a time where, people will cross the line where it becomes more than just something they handle internally, and now it becomes either a civil action or a criminal action. And you go into workplaces and you normally see, the employees' rights, and at the bottom it gives specific locations where they can report discrimination, harassment, those kind of things. And I think that is something we should contemplate putting in an ordinance, that way if it doesn't fall within the ordinance that we have, that they have a place that they can go for resources to follow up, whether it's a civil action, federal civil rights action, or criminal action. And I'd recommend maybe that inclusion as well. All right. And Monica Castillo, did you have another sheet of information you were going to provide as well?
Yes. If we could turn to slide 27 in the presentation. Just wanted to give council the opportunity to provide direction to staff as we move forward. So the areas that would be useful for us to hear back from council on is concerns the annual CPI adjustment. And again, this is for research purposes for when the time comes to develop amendments that would be submitted to the voters. So what was proposed by the HOA was changing the CPI limit. So if the CPI exceeds 6%, then the allowable, so they want to keep the current CPI, but if it exceeds 6%, the allowable increase would be the greater of 4.5% or 66% of CPI, subject to a 7% cap. The current restriction is keeping it to the existing to 75% of CPI, but with a cap of 7%. So is council interested in seeing that change? This would reduce the maximum CPI that's allowed each year.
City Attorney, can we, before we go into that specific recommendation, and it's because this is going to be for voter consideration, right?
Yes.
This is in order to create a ballot. But I think we need to be very clear with the community so that we set the right expectation, because this is a very complicated issue. And I apologize because the ballot piece was not in something that at least I was not informed about from the beginning. And for me, that is a major concern. As council members, we make decisions and we need to know how to proceed, and having the facts and understanding the process up front is important so that we can be effective in making policy changes and decisions. So one, I apologize for the city dropping the ball on that. It's happened before. We've been through this before, but we're not going to give up. We're going to continue moving forward and finding a way to make these changes possible. I think there's 3 parts to this, and they're laid out in a slide that was put together by staff and city attorney. And the one piece is what we can do now, right? In terms of what can this council do now in terms of policies. And I really want to have everybody understand what that is before we start giving direction on a ballot initiative that potentially won't come to you till 2028. Because if it requires a special meeting or special election, where are we going to get the funding for a special election on one issue? That's going to be a very difficult selling point for us. It wouldn't be financially something that we can inherit and put a burden on one issue. Maybe there's 2 or 3 other things, but right now, I don't want to give this illusion that a ballot can come to you in time, because those are the things that many of you are very concerned about. And that's the CPI formula, right? Which is what Ms. Castillo is talking about right now. So I don't want to go into something that we can't do as an immediate remedy to help support the residents that have been going through this. And the third part is obviously a standalone ordinance, and I'd love to give direction to staff to come back with that and look at other ordinances that have been done in other cities. But those are the 3 things that are in front of us. So if we clearly understand that we're all on the same page and what we can implement now, let's be clear about that before we jump into what direction we're going to give for a proposed ballot measure in the future, which would be subject to potentially another council making that decision. And I'll leave it at that just for clarity.
I'd like to comment on that. I agree 100%. We're confusing what we can do by ballot with what we can do now. And I'd like our focus to be on everything that we can do now as soon as we can, and then work on ballot measures take time, they take a lot of money, and we just need to do what we can legally do at this point. And again, so I agree heartily.
I mean, I think generally the immediate thing that we need to probably focus our attention on is what we can do. I agree. And then as we look at some of the other more substantive things, if it turns out that once we can get, I think it will be really important that we get that ballot language for what the original initiative was, because that'll help us really distinguish which things absolutely have to go back on a ballot and which ones don't. And then, because I think a lot of these things, I feel like we need more comparison, more information, more study, and we can't do them immediately. because we're all, that window has passed. And so I think we really need to identify those things that we can do and the language we can clean up and go from there.
Well, I mirror what my colleagues are saying, and that's, yeah, we probably should have been better informed about this, but we're not, so we need to move forward. And I agree that we need to move forward and do the things, change the things we can right now. But that doesn't preclude us from having a special election. Sure, they're expensive, but if it benefits the community and it needs to get done before certain things befall us in the future, then that's something a future council may do, is allocate the money for a special election. And that'll be for some of the people on this table and some that might be coming in, but it's certainly something that should always be in the back of our minds, that sometimes it costs money to do the right thing.
All right, very good. Then we will turn to slide 26 instead. So here are the changes that can be implemented now with a lower risk. We have a question of whether to authorize a hearing officer as an agent of the commission to conduct evidentiary hearings and make recommendations. So that's, I'm hearing already from council that's desired. We can add more specific hearing, briefing, record, transcript, remand, and written decision procedures consistent with our ordinance. So we can look at that, and we've heard some interest in changing rules for submission of evidence. You can go ahead and stop me if you want to comment, or I'll just keep going. And we also have the ability, and through the commission regulations, to specify how to calculate capital improvements, as long as it doesn't change the existing right to recover qualifying costs in our ordinance. And we can also establish procedures for separate itemized utility billing. And we can include an allocation methodology still consistent with the ordinance and state law. So we'll have to see what's permissible within those confines. We can also institute administrative clarifications so that there is a clear sequence for the administrator that it's 15 days to deem an application complete and ask for more information. If the application's missing something that needed to be filled in, and then another 15 days to notify the affected park or residents. So that would be permissible under the current ordinance's 30-day timeline. We will also be able to include a requirement that notices be sent in both Spanish and English. I believe we have been doing that, even though it's not required. Creating standardized forms, filing instructions, and defining terminology better. We can also administer fees once that has been approved by the city council, and we can make those fees very clear in our regulations. We only have a fee right now that is equal to an application fee and the actual cost to process that fee or that application. So we'll likely have to do like a fee study for that. And then again, what is heard loud and clear is that there is a desire for a standalone anti-harassment, anti-retaliation ordinance. So again, those changes are all going to need to be analyzed for preemption issues, meaning is there a conflict with state law and whether the city has the power to adopt those ordinances.
Excuse me, I was going to say, certainly we want to make sure that we're in everything is in compliance with current law.
Yeah.
So making sure that matches. I did want to comment on the suggestion or question about eliminating the requirement for the CPA. I'm not sure how else you would verify financials unless someone were just to submit them, but somebody would have to verify them. And I don't know if that's something that to be considered here, or if it's something that's outside and would require a vote, depending on what the original ordinance said. So I'd just like a little more information on that. If there's an alternative, less expensive alternative to that, where you get legit numbers anyway, or if we have to rely on the CPA. Thank you.
All right, if there are no more questions or discussion points, then we can move on.
All right, so if there's no more questions, council discussion on this topic?
Is there anything that was missing? I want to make sure we don't. Was there anything that was presented through your workshops that is not part of this?
I think not as relevant to the ordinance, but just there's a lot of concerns and issues that residents have that are not within the city's purview, and Ken alluded to a few of them. And it's being able to kind of be a clearinghouse, understanding what those things are. You'll see some of them in the survey and some of them we talked about tonight. We can do better communication to help people find resources and know that they have rights. That's probably the biggest benefit out of this whole process.
Anyone else? Ms. Castillo, do we know what timeline we're looking at for the voter approval or going to the voters? And can you think of any circumstances that might cause us to speed up that process? You know, to have a special election?
I am not aware of anything. I would suggest that staff look into a timeline. I think it's once council directs staff to bring forward an ordinance for voter approval, it has to be put to an election within 88 days. So the timing should be discussed both on a policy level and just what we're hearing from residents. So there's no legal restriction on when that can be done. You just you'll have to contact the county registrar of voters and coordinate with them.
All right. At this point, go ahead.
If and when this goes to the voters, is it a simple majority or a 2/3?
I believe if it's council initiated, it's simple majority. But if it's voter initiated, then you do super majority.
Well, on that, sorry, we're going to talk about voter initiative. I mean, we know that if there's enough will in the community for a voter initiative, can you explain that process just for the red? Or maybe not at this point. Maybe we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yes, I'm not very familiar with the voter initiative process.
Okay. All right.
Well, and it would be good when this comes back at some point for discussion to know if it was originally passed by voter initiative, does that make a difference? Because I believe that it was. And so can it be changed? What was the threshold for that approval? And does that dictate how it could be updated in the future?
Is there any other discussion? Does staff have enough information to move forward with those things that we can implement hopefully immediately versus those that need voter approval? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of timeline, I know that the association had mentioned a timeline of November. How does that all play into this? In terms of what they're experiencing with the multiple requests that have gone through hearings?
The November timeline relates to the fact that right now, the way our annual increase is calculated is based on October to October. So November is the trigger for the February 1st rent increase. So the idea is if something happened before November, as far as a new definition of how that annual increase is calculated, if it happened before November, then we'd have the new framework for February. But as it stands now, that won't be in place.
Because that requires voter approval.
Correct.
Does the council have any power or authority to put a moratorium on something until such a time that an ordinance or a policy change happens? And if we don't know, can you find out and let us know?
Yes, I'm familiar with moratoriums for land use ordinances, but for something like a mobile home ordinance, I would have to look into that.
So, Mr. Mason, or city manager, or our council, what is the next step? What is the next thing the public should be looking at as far as what they're going to be hearing from the city as far as what has occurred in response to this meeting?
Oops. Okay, so the next steps, I was looking at the slide because we broke it down. We broke down the next steps for you. So really draft ordinance preparation based on what is the low-hanging fruit that we can move through, move quickly through, and then council public hearings to go through that. But as a part of that, providing you with an update on the voter process and the questions that you provided on that. That would probably be the next council session to provide that information. So tee up what we can change and provide you an update and get your direction on the next part of the process.
And the change to commission regulations will require preparation of proposed regulations and having the rent commission convene and vote on those changes.
And do we know what we're looking at as far as time from today? Just an approximation.
Given the dates that we have right now, probably October.
Anything else from council? Dan?
I have a question.
Of course.
For council. If we are moving forward with the hearing officer model, we will need additional funds to hire that hearing officer. So that's something that we'll need to bring to council at a future council meeting.
Would that include an analysis of savings of existing staff, though? Is there an offset? So I would want that as part of the discussion. Okay.
Yeah, I think there'd be three things. One would be bringing that process forward. Two would be a cost benefit analysis. And three would be what the recruitment cost would be too. We'd have to go through that process of an RFP or RFQ for that.
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I think on that, that would be part of what my thought process was I wanted to hear more about that. I think Mr. Mason said that you had a matrix on some of those different, what the responsibilities could be, what it would look like. Because I think we need this is our first real bite at this apple. And so I think that we need a little bit more information so that we can give some better direction and we have a better understanding of what the process would look like, what the costs are associated, just so that we're going to this eyes wide open.
One benefit we'll have at the next time, at least for council, is it'll definitely be a robust staff report.
And Mr. Singer, it's probably incumbent on you to get a hold of our finance director and see where we can get the money and also a job description.
But that a job description I feel is a little bit ahead of putting the cart ahead of the horse. We need to have a better understanding of what they would do before I would want staff to spend time putting together a job description. And like, I feel like we need to have another conversation about, especially this particular piece personally.
One last thing, since, can we find a way to get this information out and share the complexity of what was decided today? And this goes more to staff, whether that's a conversation or a meeting with the association or the representatives. Just want to make sure everybody understands where we're at in terms of the process.
And I did only ask that question because our attorney said it was going to cost money. So just trying to find out where we're going to find it. So thank you. All right. Anything else?
May I summarize the direction? So at a future council meeting, staff will present hearing officer options and model the potential costs. And then second, staff will bring forward an ordinance, but only with permissible changes that clarify some ambiguities that don't change the meaning of the ordinance. And then lastly, staff will set up a meeting of the Rent Commission in order to deliberate new regulations.
That suffices, Councilmember Chavez. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'd like to thank everybody here that stayed here this evening and joined us and gave you your comments. We appreciate your concerns, and your concern is our concern, and we need to act on it. So we'll get our staff working on it. Thank you. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 9:01. The order.